The Third Battle of Taku Forts was an engagement of the Second Opium War, part of the British and French 1860 expedition to China. It took place at the Taku Forts near Taku district, approximately 60 kilometers southeast of Tianjin City. Background: the aim of the Allied French-British expedition was to compel the Chinese government of Peking to observe the trade treaties signed between their governments at Tianjin in 1858, which included allowing the British to continue the opium trade in China. Lieutenant General Sir Hope Grant was the British commander, with Charles Cousin Montauban, Comte de Palikau, in charge of the French. The force consisted of about 400 men, 200 British and 200 French. Hundreds of King Army troops garrisoned the Taku forts. At least 45 artillery pieces were among the Chinese defenders. A year earlier, a similar attempt had been made to steam up the river, but the King forces had made a barrier across the river, resulting in the Battle of Taku Forts. That was a disaster for the Anglo-French force. Following that humiliation, Captain Fisher of the Corps of Royal Engineers and 3 British ships, Cruiser, Forester, and Starling, were left behind to survey the area, on land as well as along the coast. The reports would determine the strategy for the next attempt. The conclusion of the Indian Mutiny had also released troops to reinforce the Hong Kong station. Battle. Not wanting to have a repeat of the 1859 disaster, on 30 July 1860 the Anglo-French army began landing at Baitang, 10 miles to the north of the forts. A few days later a reconnaissance force moved towards the Taku forts for close observation. 2 British soldiers were wounded by bullets from a Chinese jiggle. The whole force was ashore by 7 August, and a few days later, on 12 August, the Allied force advanced, pushing back enemy forces in front of them, including 2,000–3,000 cavalry. The Anglo-French expedition arrived at the forts. There were 4, 2 on the north and 2 on the south side. The French wanted to attack the southern forts, but the survey by Fisher indicated that the key was the main northern fort. On 17 August his plan was adopted. 5 batteries were established during the night of 20–21 August with fastings made using the straw walls and roofs of nearby barracks. Battery 6 French field pieces and 1 by 8-inch gun. Battery 3 by 8-inch mortars. This battery platform was made from coffin lids which were 6 inches thick. Battery 2 by 32-pounders and 2 by 8-inch howitzers. Battery 2 by 8-inch guns. Battery 6 Armstrong guns. Opening fire next morning. It took just 4 hours to crush the fort's artillery. Then the major assault took place on the main Chinese fort, attacking as 2 columns, 1 British and 1 French. Heavy fighting ensued as the attackers crossed several Chinese ditches and spiked bamboo palisades. The Anglo-French force initially attacked the main gate of the fortifications, but it was found there were 2 wet ditches and many spikes. An engineer managed to cut the ropes holding up the drawbridge, but artillery damage was so great it was too weak to support men. Few managed to enter via this route. The main attack was therefore made against the walls using the ladders. The French column managed to get onto the parapet first. The first British officer to enter the fort was Lieutenant Robert Montresor Rogers, who was later awarded the Victoria Cross for his bravery that day. He was closely followed by a private, John McDougall, who was also awarded the Victoria Cross. Resistance continued inside the fort, and it was some 3.5 hours before the fort was cleared of defenders. During the fighting, Lieutenant Rogers was severely wounded, 14 men were killed and 1 drummer boy and 46 other men were also wounded. Over 100 King defenders were killed, many more wounded and 45 guns captured. The French suffered 158 casualties. A flag of truce arrived by boat from a southern fort. The envoy was not permitted to negotiate, so the Anglo-British force advanced. 2 fresh regiments, the Buffs and the 8th Punjab Infantry, being brought up to attack the 2nd Northern Fort in heavy rain. Little resistance was offered and it was quickly captured. The 2 southern forts were untenable and capitulated. Aftermath. 7 awards of the Victoria Cross were made for gallantry on the 21st of August to soldiers of the 44th Regiment of Foot and the 67th Regiment of Foot. The third battle at the Taku forts was one of the last major engagements of the Second Opium War. The river route to Peking was now open. The Chinese authorities capitulated all 22 forts along the river as far as Tianjin, including that town. The army would march to the Battle of Palikao. The fighting ended with the Allied occupation of Peking on 13 October 1860 and the Chinese acceptance of the trading treaties.